Welcome back to the AM show. It's time for us to go into details of the big stories. Now, government has confirmed receipt of some $600 million as first tranche of an extended credit facility from the IMF. Though this may bring some relief to the government, Ghanaians may have to brace themselves for tough times ahead. This morning on the AM show, we are counting the cost of an IMF deal and what to expect. Our guest, Dr. Kabiru Mahama, is from the Office of the Vice President with the government perspective there. Dr. Saidi Drusu is an economist. Dr. Kofi Klucherson is an industrialist. And I'm learning this morning that he's been part of Ghana's industrial revolution for many decades now. Dr. Richmond Etuahin is a banking consultant. Dr. Kofi Klucherson is some former president of the Association of Ghana Industries. And he is here with me in the studio to help us really tease out the real issues with the IMF deal. That 600 million of it has already been credited to the Bank of Ghana account. Doc, grateful to have you in the studio.
Thank you. Nice meeting you.
Nice meeting you too, sir.
First time.
Exactly, yeah. and it's just telling me that there's a lot that we, the young ones, need to learn from you, the old ones. Just from the little chat we've had,
okay.
It tells that no.
We're not that old.
Say again?
We're not that old.
No, but you've seen much more than us, you know.
Yeah.
You've been here quite for a longer time.
Yeah.
So in terms of, the timing, you've been around for some time and your experience is quite vast.
Well, we tried.
With your knowledge of the Ghanaian economy, and from where we are, we know we are in tough times. But today, the IMF has brought us some respite. 3 billion, out of which 600 million has already been paid. You really understand the real economy. How much does it really mean for the economy to have $600 million?
Well, first, let me say hi to my brother Ken, the finance minister. For his resilience, in trying to push and focus agenda. This is the area that is an expertise, investment banking. So I would like to congratulate him, for doing whatever he has done. Then the issue is what next? Now that we have finished that one, as a country, what is the next stage? In life, in an economy like this, and for that matter, in business or in a family life, money is one criteria. Once it arrives, it arrives. What happens is normally it's an excitement that the money has arrived, and then the next thing, how would it be applied? That's the next stage, and what would it mean for the family? I want to put family in a context, not a country. So therefore, we spend a lot of time, whole years, following only one issue of the IMF, without looking at other options or preparing for other options, assuming nothing happens. So it has arrived. The Minister of Finance said that it's for budgetary support, which means that probably money is spent already or has been budgeted already, which will disburse against the budgetary support. That's what I understand, whatever it is that they have mentioned. So for the starters, I would say that, the country, he has done very well. As to whether or not there'll be stimulation in the economy moving forward, it's another matter. I've been involved in my short life in many things. I worked and served many presidents in my short life, even though I've never been an assemblyman. I chaired many of these committees of HIPIC, for government, John Mahama, Mills, VAT, Rawlings, and all of them. We've been through all that in what I do. Plus as a private business person and also member of the biggest industry to the Association of Ghana Industries and many more. What is happening in the country today, we need to be able to have a retrospect as to what we can do. But my joy, like your Joy FM, is that in Ghana today, thanks to you, the young people, I have a lot of confidence in the future, which I call the next generation, to be able to pick it up from there and move forward. I am in telecom sector, for many years, in the technological sector. Your boss, Kwesi Chum, is now in radio. We all came back from overseas when we were in our 30s.
Okay.
A lot of the policies in Ghana today are all done through us, not through government. You see, but government facilitated, we partnered with government to create the policies that brought all these issues. Today, there are a lot of young people again in the system. One of them just has arrived, and many more who might think that we need to rethink about the future of Ghana after this IMF business. You know, when I finished school many years ago, I wrote to World Bank, the Chicago World Bank and IMF, and to say I want money to go to Ghana to establish a business. What I got back from them was that it's not a bank. It's an institution and a policy institution that facilitates things, for governing nations. So I've learned there is not a vault, to get money from. So therefore, the money that is coming to Ghana today is where does it originated from? So we call it debt, DEBT on the country. So therefore, according to the Minister of Finance, what I heard of yesterday was that it's for budgetary support, like I said earlier on. So whatever the issues are, we need to know how it's going to be disbursed. Our problem in industry, our problem in this sector is that if it is disbursed, what next for the next 2 years of the governing government? So far nothing is coming out yet as to what the issues are. So we need to see how it flows. That's my initial statement, and see what we can do. But I believe that, like we say in business, there must be plan B. And plan C, assuming the force majeure or other issues close in, what do we do? Basically, that is my first, opening statement. Okay,
all right, grateful to you. So let's move on and welcome our next guest in the studio, who just joined us here. Doc, good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm doing great.
Okay. Now, we were all battling for this because many of you, the economists, said that we were in dire times. Some even predicted that if IMF doesn't come to our aid early, the economy could ground to a halt. We've had this. What do we foresee to be, the impact of this particular arrangement, if you look at all the things that this deal is set to achieve?
Yeah, so first of all, good morning to you and good morning to Doc, my senior brother, for having me to have this discussion. On the issue of the $600 million out of the $3 billion expected to be received by Ghana, the immediate impact of this is that we will have some stability. Stability in the sense that our foreign exchange, or the depreciation of our currency, even though from November up to date, we've had some appreciation of our cedi by some 33%.
Today I'm learning that he even depreciated our debt by some 141 billion cedis, just because of the cedi appreciation.
Yeah, I mean, the appreciation of the cedi is something that this 600 million is going to bring too. We know that exchange rate has spiral effect, it has cascading effect on inflation to the extent that some of the inflation is imported, and is imported because we have some foreign exchange depreciation. We are expecting to have some price stability also following this amount. Two, I mean, Prof. Doc mentioned that it's a budgetary support. It means that the 2023 budget that the finance minister presented to Parliament, approved by Parliament on behalf of the people of Ghana, we are expecting that means that we'll have a balanced budget going into the end of December 2023, because some funding has been provided to that effect. Another important effect of that is that, it unlocks the foreign direct investment. Because the vote of confidence by the IMF on the Ghanaian economy, the uncertainty that surrounded the economy, the lack of predictability, and the fear that the risk factors that investors were considering, with this amount coming into the Bank of Ghana account, the central bank's account at the Bank of Ghana, it means that some investors or foreign direct investors will now be willing to bring in their capital. In the medium term, we will also expect that Ghana is a major partner or participant in the capital market. being a major participant in the capital market means that with this money coming, people would then know that, okay, there's some stability, there's some confidence, and then they can then borrow to Ghana. Of course, there are limitations, there are conditionalities regarding borrowing in terms of threshold imposed by the IMF in the context of making our debt very sustainable. But these are some of the immediate impact we are expected, we foresee with this 600 million dollars hitting the accounts of the government.
So how clear is our way to recovery now?
Yeah, so clearly, you cannot have a farm program without a roadmap. So when the government presented the letter of intent, accompanying this letter of intent was the roadmap, which is the Memorandum of Economic and Financial Policy of Government. It clearly stated what government wants to do, how we want to have, within the 3 years, reduce inflation to a single digit, 8% plus or minus 2%. We also have a roadmap on investing into the private sector, private-led growth, where entrepreneurship is going to be an anchor of the PCPEC program. Government has also outlined some, if you like, they call them performance criteria. So the whole essence of the fund is that it is going to be performance-based. So between now and the next 6 months, there are certain things to be achieved. For instance, our reserves position must improve. We'll also look at the central bank claims on the central government, the threshold on that. We also look at inflation. Because of the performance-based nature of this fund, we are sure that we'll be ticking the boxes as we go. In fact, there are structural benchmarks, structural reforms, where the cabinet is expected to approve some new policy documents now into November. So all these policies and the complete document presented to the IMF presented the roadmap, the framework to recovery. And the expectation of everyone and even the government is that between 2023 and 2026, we will have brought our economy back to a relatively stable economic path. So this is the expectation, and the blueprint is it was on the basis of the blueprint that the IMF approved the program.
But that's what is on paper. We know that for you guys in government, usually the paper will look beautiful. But when it comes to implementation, then we have gaps, we have challenges. So if you take what's on the paper, what's the strategy that government is using to ensure that at the end of the day, whatever we've stated on that paper or in that document, we are able to accomplish?
First and foremost, it is in government's own interest to ensure that the paper is achieved, because we cannot have subsequent releases if we don't achieve what is on paper. And when we don't get subsequent releases from the IMF, it means that our program will be derailed. And what it also means is that the Ghanaian people will be back on the street. The government people will now have to face the difficulties of the time. So it is in the interest of the government to ensure that we achieve the program. So that personal interest, of course, of government, in this case, is a commitment enough. Again, there are safeguards. The safeguards in the sense that because it's a farm program, it's money being given by way of non-interest-based loan to the to the central government. The people giving the money also have interest, i.e. the IMF. They have interest because that was what they were looking for, the financing assurance. They don't want a situation where Ghana will not be able to repay them their money, because the 3 billion is a loan, more or less, and Ghana has to pay them back. So because I am the creditor and I have to watch over the debtor to ensure that the debtor takes steps so that the debtor will be able to pay me my money when they fall due. That is another safeguard that I think that aside the parliament having oversight responsibility, aside civil society like media houses also having responsibility, aside industry players all asking questions and putting government on check, on the toe, I think that government's own interests and the fund's own interests are enough commitment to ensuring that we achieve with this program.
Okay. Dr. Kabiru Mahama is from the Office of the Vice President, so I'm sure he has a lot of, intel when it comes to how we're going to do it. I'll come back to you to understand how you, the industrialists, are feeling that what this deal could bring to you. But let me go to Dr. Said, who's also an economist, and he's joining us via Zoom now. Doc, you've studied this document between the country and the IMF. What are your pickouts, and how do those tell you that probably we are on a path of recovery that would see us not returning to the IMF?
Good morning to my
great. Okay.
Good morning to my co-panelists and good morning to all your listeners. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Oh, okay, great. I think so far, let me say that I'll congratulate Ken Oforiatta for being able to secure an early IMF deal. I say it early because the government itself was expecting it by June. So for the first tranche payment of 600 to be coming in May or to have been received in May is really good. But let's put that aside. The first question I would really want to ask is that had the government demonstrated enough fiscal discipline for Ghanaians to trust it will manage the IMF funds well enough, especially now that we are heading into a presidential and parliamentary elections in 2024? I think that is the major question every Ghanaian should be asking the government. Looking at how the government has spent or looking at how the government has managed our finances from 2017 all the way till now. Because even the international community before the IMF deal had asked the government to reduce its ministers, if you could remember, but the government did not do that. So many measures were being put out even by the international community and experts asking the government to cut back on costs in certain areas. The government gave deaf ears to it, never did that. So when you have such a situation and now the government is coming into contact with such huge monies, again, trust becomes important. And if government could actually demonstrate enough to Ghanaians, then I believe whatever that is being in the IMF report, people will begin to believe that the government will be able to achieve them. Right now, I describe the current situation we face. Following the announcement all the way to Friday, the money being received, the first December payment, where the finance minister said that it will go into budgetary support. Everything happening now is like honeymoon period. You know, when you're newly married, you're so excited, everything looks good and all that. that is what we are having now in Ghana. So based on the honeymoon period, you see that we already having a stability in our city because it's reducing as at this point. There's currency appreciation and all that because the dollar is going down because of speculations in the market. That is driving that. It's not that like the government has actually done anything as we speak. That is bringing down, appreciating our city value. So based on the honeymoon period, forest traders and all that, people are anticipating, speculations here and there. So that is why we're having some of these impact. So the government should not at least quickly take credit. Let's see how we move from the honeymoon period into the real marriage. That is where the issues comes in. Look at what is already happening with Kumau by-election. Definitely there will be financing going on and stuff like that. So can the government really commit to the fiscal discipline? The IMF report is very beautiful, especially if you go to the page 55 of the report, the government roadmap. Believe me, you really be interested in knowing how government will achieve over the 40 policies it has laid out to do. If government actually achieves that, then it will be good for the economy. But looking at the government past record, can we trust it enough and put our confidence and hope in it as Ghanaians that it will actually lead us to this beautiful roadmap that it has laid out in the IMF report?
Now, one other concern is that we've dealt with the domestic debt exchange, but we've not finished with the external debt exchange. We know, for example, Zambia and all of those had the program with the IMF, but because they had not completed the external debt, the funds were not trickling in. How do we ensure that we are able to, complete our external debt so that we don't fall in the examples of what Zambia got into?
I think on that note, at least with the negotiations so far, I'm very confident that the external debt restructuring will also be done. Because if there were no assurances that it will be done, I don't think the IMF will even release the first tranche. But on that aspect, I'm sure that it will be done. But even despite that, look at the domestic debt restructuring that we did. The country hasn't recovered yet, especially the financial institutions, where banks made so many losses. GCB making over $50 million by the end of 2020, and so many other banks. So government itself has to even set up the Financial Stability Fund, which is yet to be set up to deal with that. You understand? So the IMF money itself cannot even do all what we are expecting it to get done unless we have the donor commitment from other development partners to be able to support. I am not even particularly interested in the banking sector much more because without the Financial Stability Fund, so many of these banks will collapse. There will be job losses. Yes.
Okay. All right. Grateful to you. Let me come in studio. Dr. Christensen, for you industrialists, how does this deal mean to you? How do you feel now that you know that we've gotten it and then 600 million is already in town?
Well, like I'm saying, like everybody's saying, like my younger brother said, this money is not for industrialists, it's for monetary support.
Yeah, I know.
So therefore, you see, the issues about Ghana is to be able to do collaboration with the private sector. Ghana today has moved on, after many, many years. It cannot be government alone. Government must realize that there are a lot of, look, the last 6 weeks, I've been going around the whole system. There are a lot of brilliant, brilliant young men in the system with this government, everywhere that you go. I can give you names, I give you the sector that I've been going through and meeting them, and I'm so much impressed. But when you speak to them, the answer comes from their mouth. They say, hey, doc, the top is too heavy for us. You see, we grew up the structural adjustment program. It's all the private sector. We see Kofi, we see Chung, wherever it is, Kenoforiata. We move on to the HIPIC. So many of these programs have come. IMFs, young man like doc. We helped to build the country because, you see, there are 3 bankruptcies in the world, 13, 11, and 7. I think we are in 11. I chaired a meeting with all the banking sector, about these. And I asked one question. What is going on in this country today? So I told them, are we bankrupt? So they went over look at the face, and one of them is a microphone here. I said, don't worry, I'll take full responsibility for whatever answers come. He said, oh, doc, I want to tell you, yes, we are bankrupt. I said, good, then that's the beginning place. Let's declare that, which area, I'm sure that way to look at the IMF report. I read the IMF report, wonderful report. But who is in charge of that report in terms of implementation? The whole report is written on the issue of growth. I loan you money, how do you pay my debt? If you do, look, one of the major brilliant one was the ECG. For the first time, the CEO of ECG moved in the front, I'm going to collect my debt. And within 2 weeks, he collected 5.7. Why should you have to wait for now to collect $5.7 million debt? Look at top. See, there are a lot of issues that are going on in this country. I want to know, industry want to know, who do we talk to? Minister of Trade and Industry. Whom do we talk to be able to benefit from the policies of this IMF? I don't think anybody in industry is excited about any IMF because we know what to do. Look, I met Guta, Ghana Union Traders. I established that many years ago. I was told when I met them, last week, they have 78, sectors that form Ghana Union Traders, over 3 million members. You see, the Bible says the cry of the people is the Bible, the cry of God. You see, like I was saying that, even God had 3 channels of going forward. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, not one. You see, we need to be able to accept that like Doc and all the young people, there are many, many more brilliant people in the system today. Like Professor Kote said from ISE, let us have some little conference, little tea or coffee, and talk what is the next level. IMF is gone, it's dead. Nothing you can do about it. Today is Kumau. By tomorrow, another issue of Kumau, jubilation for another week or 2. What next? You see, what Doc is saying today is that government's commitment. Which government are we talking about? The current government has 1.5 years to go. There are 3 young people who want to be president. And they are all Ghanaian young people, brilliant brothers who want to be president. One of them will win. Assuming you say, I don't want to support this, what happens? So we need to be able to be very honest to ourselves. I don't want comparison to Zambia or whatever. Ghana is capable.
Okay.
Let's have a Ghana solution. Let all the presidents meet, past and present, drink coffee at Pedroasi Lodge, and let's become friends. The major problem that is, look, sometimes I wonder about this MPP and NDC thing. Look, there's no, I'm saying it for fact. There's no NDC or MPP. They are cousins. NDC and MPP, they are cousins. We released them on the same day, 28 July 1992. To you to stop and create a new policy for Ghana. So what's all these that are going on that we cannot get together and help young people like this to move on and establish their life and families to grow? We don't have a problem. You see, it's not about an academic exercise. It's a Ghanaian exercise. At least on General Sam, you said on your radio. Almost 90 years old guy, General Sam, the issue he's talking about, Asher Larson, Ghana has gone on. Let us go back to the foundation. Ken came, we brought Ken down to Ghana because of the stock exchange. That's how he came to Ghana after Kelly Gajeko. We brought them, I was part of it. So what happened with the stock exchange? This money is from the New York Stock Exchange, not from anywhere. They carried them around and sent it to the bank. So what's wrong with the Ghana? We have a brilliant vice president. He's been a Bank of Ghana. Is he in charge or is he politically in charge? You see, some of the comments, some of the issues that goes on, please, for me, forex industry, and many, many others, let us hold, fine, this is finished. What do we do going forward? I'm a very optimistic person. I've been through challenges, whatever. The last time I came to I said, look, let's bring our brothers back. We're still doing whatever. Let's do reparation. Let us forgive everybody. Let's begin. We are sorry, we are at fault, we didn't do that. Bring the bank. Let's stimulate the economy. So look, if you don't stimulate the economy, I'm coming up with one of the major projects in Ghana here. How does every home has internet? Students don't have laptops, they don't have internet, they don't have Wi-Fi. Children. Look, some children came to my house yesterday, my cousin. They shoot at Wi-Fi and they are very happy. So let's focus on the growth economy. Look, I drove around Smithers Road yesterday. I don't want to deviate. I was shocked to see the massive development by non-Ghanaians on that road. On that road. You see, so there is a lot to do. We should not too much worried about whatever. Government had done what they have done. Kind of for the Minister of Finance need to do something. He did very well. Like we all congratulate him. Let's focus on what that government is. Let's meet that government. Industry, trade. Let's do a party. Let's do a meeting. Who is that government that's going to implement this? You see, we are worried because, according to Ghana's program, Doc knows, the last budget for this government is in November. That's the last government budget. So what happens in 2024? There's no budget. It's only appropriation for 2025. So who is going to implement this money, which is a government? See, that government, I think, is too big for me, from understanding industry, trade, or whatever. You see, we have a very, look, people have been forgotten about tourism. I sit in Ghana here, and many people are coming to Ghana because of African continental trade. African continental trade is huge. They decided to set up in Ghana, thanks to government. They negotiated, they fought for it. If you look at the African continent, telecom is it's $100 billion economy just to rebuild. You see, and many others. They are not.
So I'll let us come to what needs to be done. But Doc, let's go to in the program, monetary and exchange rate policy. Now it says that the Bank of Ghana's monetary policy goal is to bring inflation back to 6 to 10% target by end of the program. Notwithstanding the large monetary policy rate hikes and the increase in reserve requirement over the past year, inflation has remained high. This reflects the limited effectiveness of these monetary policy instruments in the face of large monetary financing, the government deficit, and supply shocks. The BOJ is committed to continuing increasing its policy rate and maintain the tight monetary policy stance until inflation is on a firmly declining path. But that would obviously impact how much, industry borrows from the banks, isn't it? Wouldn't that affect how the economy would then expand?
Yeah, so, if you read that rendition, you read that government is, the art of balancing the management of the economy, because we know the Bank of Ghana primary role is to ensure price stability. In other words, they need to rein in inflation and make sure that our economy is on a sound footing. But central bank financing of central government has also created its own problem. In other words, it is one of the avenues for inflation, because you are trying to implement tightening monetary policy. At the same time, you are financing the budget deficit or budget, shortfalls of central government. So what basically it seeks to suggest is that, look, let's stop in fact, as part of the prior actions, central bank is not financing central government anymore, as part of the conditions we needed to meet before we have the money coming in. Now, but moving now into the medium term, say towards the end of the year and to the start of next year, we need to still do something about inflation. The Monetary Policy Committee of the Central Bank is meeting today, and I'm sure new measures is going to be announced. What basically it means is that, look, let's keep the policy rate a bit high. When you do that, any liquidity still in the system, excess to the extent that that money is not being invested in productive sectors of the economy but for consumption, would be taken out. It also means that policy rates of banks may likely go high. And it also means that industries may be affected within the context of all this whole discussion. But the long-run impact of that is that when you bring down inflation, then you start the cycle of having a policy rate coming down. Then you start the cycle of interest rate coming down, and banks can then borrow. So if you're in a crisis, first of all, try to manage the crisis. And what the central bank and the IMF is just basically proposing is that, look, in the meantime, manage the crisis. Let's have some stability. Let's tighten the policy a bit to have some stability, which is going to be more or less a difficult period for Ghanaians and industries. But the long impact or the long-term effect of it is that it will then tend to bring back some stability, business, like we had post-HIPIC. Okay, and then we even have post the IMF program that was recently concluded. Interest rates were coming down. People could go and borrow as low as 15% interest until this time it went to 35% lending rate. So that is basically now let's manage the crisis. Let's tighten the monetary policy. Let's stop zero financing of central bank to central government. And then when you have some stability, then you can then reduce or loosen some of this monetary policy in the form of quantitative easing to ensure that the economic grow.
What do you then say to people who argue that the inflation we're seeing is not really about you lowering monetary policy rate, but it's really about the exchange rate? When the exchange rate becomes better, then we'll see that inflation will reduce. How do you address people?
Yeah, so
I spoke to some business people who were telling me, they said, look, the inflation is not really about monetary rate being lowered.
Even when I listened to Dr. Said, he mentioned about the fact that the money is going to be one that is going to make our CD appreciate, which is true. But as I said, before the money even came in, some from November up to now, the CD has been appreciating against the dollar. Now, the question people ask, has government done anything different? I said yes, government, the implementation of the goal for oil policy has taken off some pressure from the demand that was on the Forex by BDCs. So that is one major intervention government did. And government was also able to say, because we've been arguing and people were rubbishing it because of policy. When we say that speculation have huge impact, very, very huge impact on the economy, especially on the Ghanaian cedi. That whenever we are going to have very catastrophic depreciation of the cedi, it is largely attributed to, what do you call it, speculation. Even though, speculation is also triggered by a lot of factors, confidence issues. It's also triggered by the fact that people go to the banks for hard currency and they are not getting. All those things also trigger speculation. But the fact is that, and I've always maintained that, the Ghanaian economy and the demand for dollar, and even in the context of a lockdown where global supply chains are still disrupted, the demand for hard currency couldn't have in itself triggered the sort of depreciation we had over the period. So in that regard, I tend to a bit disagree to the fact that this money came in and it is supposed, it is the one going to help us with the management. In fact, it's going to support, but the government had already taken measures in terms of ensuring that there is some stability. Now, you raised an important question of how do we ensure that, because people raise and ensure that the inflation we are having is not basically because there's money in the system, but because there are several, of course, one aspect of the inflation, whenever there is fuel price increases, expect inflation to go high. Whenever you have food prices going high, expect inflation to go high. When you have PURC increasing utility tariffs, expect inflation to go high. So all these factors were working against or were conspiring against government in terms of how prices are going up. But, if the major driver in the estimation of government was that if close to 60%, 60 to 70% of our basket is imported, then definitely exchange rate you cannot jettison the effect of exchange rate on the inflation we experience. Okay, that was one thing. So until that time, we transition towards a more, domestic production of goods and services, we'll still have this problem occurring, especially so when we have a shock of this nature that we had. So quite right, there were some internal factors. When domestic production of food, the finance agri minister had to set up some food market at the ministry in the midst of this crisis. So when we have all those problems occurring, then we have genuine concern to think that it is internal. But when you look at the whole basket, the basket is dominated by imported goods. So to that extent, inflation will be imported, and it's by importation, exchange rate, and global prices rise, and the global price rise is also going to account for the inflation that we experience within the country.
All right. You're still watching the AM show on the JoyNews channel. I'm here in studio with Dr. Prince Kofi Krucheson, who is former president of the AGI. He is also chairman for, I think, Celtel Networks Limited, and a pioneer in the IT industry of this country. I'm here with Dr. Kabiru Mahama as well. He is with the Vice President's office, and then so he would be doing a lot of the education from the government's point of view, because I'm seeing that there's also going to be a reduction in transfers to MDAs as well. He would have to educate all of us to understand. But what's the impact of this also on banking sector? Because we realize that the banks lost a lot of revenue as a result of the debt exchange program. A banking consultant will be joining us shortly. Dr. Etiahene will be joining us so that we can have a chat on that as well. Dr. Said is also with us. He is an economist based outside of the country. Doctor, you've listened to your colleague here, Dr. Mahama, explaining, what they intend to do in terms of even the monetary policy rate and how it won't. In the short term, it will really affect all of us. We will go through some hardship, but in the long term, it will really be good for all of us. You feel that will be the way to go about it?
Well, I just had to make this correction. My name is Saad, not Saeed.
Oh, Saad. Okay.
Yes, Saad. Yes, Saad, not Saeed.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you call me behind the scenes, I will accept that, because it's public. That's why I'm just making that correction. So
that's okay, sir.
Just to put that, yes. And coming back to the point, I do agree a little bit, but not entirely, to what Dr. Mahama was saying. If you look at the monetary policy rate in particular with the Bank of Ghana, as at March 2023, raising it to 29.5%. You see, I always say that the Ghanaian economy is not like the US economy. It's not like the, developed economies like London and other places, right? So when you are dealing with the Ghanaian economy, you don't just need to transfer the textbook knowledge to apply. It doesn't work with Ghana. You really need to at least do things differently. Believe me, the IMF, the World Bank, most of their policies are basically what probably developed nations should be doing. Because let's say in the US, right? If I go to the shop to buy any product in US, they wouldn't look at me and sell it to me based on my personality. They would sell it based on the price of the item. So even if Bill Gates goes to the same market to buy that item, the price will still be the same. They won't say because he's Bill Gates, they will increase the price. But if you come to Ghana, our system is not like that. You go to the market queens or the traders will even sell you tomatoes based on how you are dressed. They will sell you onions based on how you are dressed. So we have a different level of inflation in Ghana, which is totally different from the regular textbook inflation that we all know. And until the government focuses its attention on that and sees that the inflation is not just as is being defined in the textbook, but there is some element to the Ghanaian inflation. If you increase the monetary policy rate, you are going to make it difficult for small-scale businesses to borrow in the country. So in an attempt to reduce inflation in your economy, you end up collapsing the small-scale businesses who solely depend on imports. You understand? Because our inflation, even though it's still generated by higher prices, but some of them are deliberately done by our market queens and kings. So that is why I have a problem with number 3 on the document, which is on page 55, page 56. Because the more government increases the policy rate, the more Bank of Ghana increases the policy rate, we will end up crippling our small-scale businesses who depend on loans from the bank because the interest rates will go up. And I'm even surprised that the industry association leaders are not speaking about this. They need to let the government know. There's nothing to be scared about this because your businesses will be affected. Because you need the microfinance loan, you need the small scale loan, you need those loans to be able to pump into your businesses. So there is a bit of trade-off, and the government must realize this trade-off so we don't destroy our domestic economy more. Again, if you come back to the IMF, some of their conditionalities, I do have a problem, again, especially if you come to like the energy sector and the cocoa sector that they are talking of. Why is the IMF not telling us to invest in rice production, to invest in maize production, to invest in grain and cereal, so that we'll be able to supply our nation with the basic foodstuffs that we will need? Are you following? Why is the IMF only focusing on cocoa sector? When you go to our basic markets, where a chunk of the inflation is coming from, do people eat cocoa? They don't. People are more focused on the rice that they are going to buy. People are more focused on the bag of corn that they are going to buy. The day-to-day bread and butter issues. Why is the IMF not suggesting to government to improve the agricultural sector to be able to stabilize food in Ghana so that we wouldn't have to import food more? So at this point in time, the government itself really needs to sit back. Like I said, the IMF report is very beautiful, but how does it meet the day-to-day butter and bread issues of the Ghanaian, the average Ghanaian, who doesn't even think about international reserves, how much Ghana has, who will only get up how to get from Dansuma to Latabio, Kwashi, or whatever. Transport first. What is government going to do about that? Rent. A landlord will increase rental payments and blame it on inflation, blame it on the dollar. Yet his transaction with the tenant has nothing to do with the dollar. These are the basic challenges that are facing the average Ghanaian on the street, who will not even care about how much IMF is giving Ghana. So my whole point is that the Ghanaian government must shift away from all these beautiful policies it has put on paper and actually study the economy, the local economy, and see what are the day-to-day bread and butter issues that it could put measures on. You understand? That it could put measures on. That even if the IMF doesn't give us money, at least we will be able to survive.
Okay.
Because look, since 1966, this is Ghana's 18th IMF bailout. So if IMF was really good for us, I'm not saying they are not good for the economy, but if IMF really supported or salvaged the Ghanaian economy, we wouldn't be going back to the 18th time. I follow my whole drift. And again, even if you go back to the IMF own report, go to page 35. The IMF own projections of our public debt, it will tell you that there is a likelihood Ghana will be going back for another 19th IMF bailout immediately after this. And it doesn't matter which government comes next, even if it is the NDC government that comes next. If they are not careful, they will go back to the IMF. Because our debt projections means that by 2025 onwards, we will still be in the debt distress, because you are talking of debt to GDP ratio of 90.2 all the way to 86%. So it still doesn't address, in the long run, it still doesn't address our debt distress situation as a country. And that is where policymakers, like I keep saying, they need to focus on the domestic economy. They need to really look into and see how to run the economy totally separate from the textbook definitions that we have. That is the only way we will be able to stop ourselves from constantly going back onto the IMF. Because right now it's like we are in a cycle. We destroy our economy through GDP, collapse banks, then we go back again, then we come back, okay, we are now going to establish a fund to stop this bank. So it's like you are just in a cycle.
In a cycle.
So why must you keep for over 60 years? Why must a country keep being in such a cycle? It means that policymakers haven't studied the Ghanaian economy.
Okay, all right.
Textbook economics is good. We all learn it. But every economy is different. That is my view.
Okay, grateful.
Until you know your economy, you can never get solution.
Okay, thank you. So that Dr. Saad Idrisu there. Now, Kabiru, let me come to you here. Now, in the document, it says primary expenditure will be reduced by 2 percentage points of GDP, mainly by lowering capital expenditures through project reprioritization, including providing around 0.9% of GDP of savings, containing the wage bill by limiting wage increases and hiring. You would have to explain to us what that means. Also, rationalizing goods and services spending, reducing transfers to statutory funds through a reduction of the cap on the share of revenue that they can receive. These measures can be supported by steps to strictly tighten expenditure economic controls of both MDAs and statutory funds. What do you mean by this?
Yeah, before I just quickly, let me try to agree and disagree with Dr. Saad a bit when he mentioned that this country's architecture, government has to consider, look, we all admit that in a highly informal economy where the economy is not captured in the books of the government, there's likely to be this acts of people pricing arbitrarily, people pricing, using their own discretion. And we've lamented that when the president noted that in one of his speeches, I think no one came to his aid when it was attacked by everyone, that he had asked the market queen to be considerate, that he's now blaming the market queens. But we all admit that this is the real problem of the Ghanaian economy. How will policy address that? Policy will address that by the steps we take to formalize the economy. So government understands that, and government is trying to do that. I agree with him that, look, no economies are the same. Every economy has its own peculiar circumstances and nature, and you need to understand your economy and take measures to address them. So, and also the point about IMF, going back to IMF, you see, the policy objective is to reduce the risk of debt distress from high risk to moderate. So that policy objective is clear in the document. So 86% of debt to GDP, is something of a moderate risk. So it is not to suggest that the program within 3 years, which is not long-term to even state with, okay, that is the very short-term policy framework or tenor, is to reduce the program, the debt to a moderate risk. So that's why it is around still 86. But that is also notwithstanding the fact that government is trying to limit even borrowing. So I just want to explain that a bit and then come to the substantive point about government limiting hiring and also wage bill. You know, when you read that...
if you could just hold on for me on that same question, I'll come back to you to take. But let me join Dr. Etuahine, who is a banking consultant. He's joining us on phone. Doc, grateful for you to join us here. Now, we understand that the DDEP is deemed to have cost banks some 37 billion Ghana cedis. Do banks have any redemption from this particular arrangement between Ghana and the IMF after you've perused this document?
Thank you very much, and good morning to your cherished listeners. You know, we find ourselves with these losses. This year, all the banks have captured most of the impairments, which is about 19.4 billion. And by the calculation, using even the 16% discount factor, the total should have been 37.5. So we left with 17.1 thereabouts. The question is that the document is advising all the banks that will fall short of the capital to be seriously looking for capital, and it is in the document. He said every bank should submit its individual capital plan with a time bound to Bank of Ghana for approval by September 2023. What is on the ground is that if you look at the losses and even the financial stability, which is supposed to address some of these solvency, you begin to find out that if the banks were to capture all the losses as is being required and bring your capital plan for approval, I think that there is a lot of hurdles to be cleared, because I'm not sure whether the shareholders will be able to do this within this short space of time. But it's a requirement in the document 41. If you read 2021-41, it is clearly stated there. The only hope that I think the banks, especially indigenous banks, would hope and pray that the stability fund of 1.5 billion set up would give them some space to be able to support them for the time being. But if you were to go to the shareholders at the moment to tell them to bring this money, it's not going to be easy at all. We all saw from the financial sector reform in 2018 and 2019 up to 2020. It took some of the bank, even the guts had to come in to support the 400 million. But if you look at the capital adequacy ratios that has been produced, you could see that even with the first tranche, that losses that has been captured, some banks have negative capital. Some banks have negative capital. So if you capture the whole lot, because there are outstanding that has to be captured, if you capture the whole lot, some of the banks would, especially the local banks, because if you have read from Bloomberg, all the South African banks are getting ready for recapitalization. And I know the Nigerian banks are putting in plans, serious plans to recapitalize the banks in Ghana.
Okay.
So I'm only praying that the stability fund will be adequate, temporary, to support them, so that it gives a longer period for the shareholders to come in. Because what has happened is not the fault of the shareholders. It is not the fault of the shareholder. You were selling a product, and you didn't say caveat emptor. A buyer must be aware. In Latin, we say caveat emptor, caveat emptor. A buyer must be aware. If that clause was attached to the bond, you cannot blame those who bought it. But if there were no clause to it, and you decide to restructure it to bring such a huge losses, then you should actually have a JoJo, agree with them, and give them space, especially the private-owned banks, domestic banks in Ghana. They have done well. They have contributed very well. But the situation they find themselves now, they need to be given a space. And it is my prayer that the Stability Fund will be adequate, at least to give them a briefing space, so that maybe their shareholders will be preparing. Because if you look at the plan, it said that you must bring your plan by the June ending. Every individual bank must bring his plan, and then it should be approved by September ending. So the shareholders are now, the board of the directors are now going to sit down to capture the losses that has hit them. Previously, what we have today, or the end of the year, was only 19.4 by their calculation and their publication. So there is an outstanding that has to be captured. And so you're supposed to capture all the losses and then draw your plan how you're going to recapitalize the bank over the period. And I'm saying that if the Stability Fund is well set up, and it is in the document, it is support an early capitalization by the GFS. And if they do that, and they give a breathing space to the shareholders, it will help them.
Okay. I hope this time around, from what we are seeing, we're not going to see any bank collapse as a result of this.
Well, the document is trying to tell us that the Stability Fund is so important. And especially, I'm only referring to the local indigenous bank, because the foreign banks, a bank like one of the banks, he captured the whole losses. Boom. He didn't even wait for them to structure it. The other ones have been given 4 years time space. But the one bank has captured the losses, and his capital adequacy is more than the required 16%. That bank is free. But the others, there's another one Nigerian bank who also captured the whole loss. But the rest has skilled it in such a way that maybe they've given them 4-year period. But suddenly, you're being told to bring a capital plan. You need to capture the impending losses and then draw a plan how you're going to. That is what I'm saying, that the CGF, the GFS, if it's done very well, it will be able to mitigate some of these things, the solvency and the challenges we are talking about.
Okay. But my question was that we don't foresee any collapse, right?
Well, if what I've seen in the document, if it's well established and planned very well, we may not.
Okay.
We may not, because I think that the fund and Bank of Ghana have sat down to do the testing, scenario testing, and so possibly saw that if the GSF, the fund, is set up, it will be able to mitigate that. So I don't foresee that. I don't foresee that.
Okay.
But you see, my worry is that if you look at the fiscal cost, you say a possible fiscal cost of this sector is about 2.6% of GDP. I believe when we started this game, I have been saying it, and I've been saying it over and over again. I have never seen any document that even talked about the cost of the DDEP to the financial sector. And I was wondering why in the whole country we have to wait for the IMF document for us to see even the cost. Because if we knew the cost, then you should have planned. The impact should have been planned earlier. Because I started talking about this in, I think, 5 months ago in one of my presentations at George. I said we're going to have a serious impact. But at that time, people didn't understand what we were saying. Because even let me read something to you. It said the estimated NPV reduction is on 16 to 18% discount factor. Whereas, if you look at the bonds, the effective coupon rate was 19.3. So you can see that even that one has been varied a little to reduce the cost to the bank. If we have used the original 19.3%, insolvency would have been serious in the banking sector.
Okay, Doc.
So by varying it to the lower end, which is people have used the 16%, there is still a loss to be done. But as I said, I have never seen anybody. That is what my worry is, that nobody has asked this question.
Okay.
It is until the fund saying the possible physical cost of the possible is not the final possible.
Okay.
will be up to 2.6% of the GDP. If
Okay,
we knew
Doc.
it was going to be the cost like that, if there were no alternatives.
Doc, I'm grateful. Thank you so much. Dr. Richmond Etuahene is a banking consultant there. Well, let me come back to the studio. Kabiru, when you were speaking, you were really shaking.
I think that there were certain things you mentioned about the DDE and the impact of the DDE on banking sector. In fact, government knew of it. Government had discussed it. I was privy to a discussion on the possible impact of the DDE on the financial sector.
Okay.
And if you read page 20 of the report, you realize that the report copiously stated that Ghana's financial sector was relatively robust.
Yeah, he made mention to it, but he was saying that
I'm coming to the genesis of that statement in that report, following the banking sector cleanup. That the banking sector cleanup had ensured robustness in our financial sector, but the DDE has potential impact. As far back November last year, I was privy to a discussion by the central bank with the central government, Minister of Finance, giving forbearances, suggesting some forbearances or regulated forbearances in order to curtail some of the impact of the DDE program. I'm privy to the discussion that government wanted to set up the Financial Stability Fund, which they had approached the World Bank to make sure that they commit fund, and the World Bank had committed 250 million, and AFDB is also committing some 100 million to it. So government had contemplated it. If doctor was not privy to the discussion, government was well aware that, look, the program we are doing, government was aware that 30 to 50% of the exposures of these banks are by way of government securities. By way of money they have lent to government by way of bond. So government understood this. It isn't the report that came to highlight it.
But do we know how much it was going to cost? Because his point was that we didn't know how much it was going to cost the banking sector.
We knew how much it was going to cost. In fact, the exposure of each bank was different. And that is why even in the stability fund, it was proposed that we have to use a criteria of depending on the different exposure level. You cannot use a blanket, a one-fit-in-all approach for all the banks. So that was done.
How much?
Analysis.
Okay, so how much?
Analysis. I will not be able to give you the figures off it. So that has to just note on that.
Okay.
You had mentioned additional.
Exactly. Lowering capital expenditure through project reprioritization. Containing the wage bill by limiting wage increases and hiring, because a lot of people have issues with this one, and also reducing transfer to statutory funds through a reduction of the cap of the share of revenue that they can receive. Yeah,
so the cap was basically, the proposal was that it's instead of 25%, it's going to 17.5% of statutory funding, and that was presented to Parliament as part of the 2023 fiscal policy. So most of these things that you find in here are contained in the budget. By way of limiting expenditure on capital and reprioritization, what basically government seeks to do is that we have a lot of development projects going, a lot of infrastructure projects ongoing. Their flagship program. Let's focus between now and the next 2-3 years on finishing this project. Let us not go to instart or to commence new projects where commencement certificates will be given for the start of new projects, unless those projects are crucial to ensure, emergency situation. For example, if a bridge, say from a particular village to another is, pulled off by waters. Okay, you need to put that. Those are emergency projects, except that government doesn't intend to commence any major infrastructure project. And if government does that, some 0.9% of savings of GDP will be made. Government also intends to moderate the rate with which we increase salaries of workers. Moderating means that, for instance, of course, this is even related to the inflation. If you have your inflation coming down and cost of living, cost of cola, is associated with inflation, right? If you are able to contain inflation, it means that the rate of increasing your cola is also going to come down. So what basically government seeks to do by that particular statement is that, look, we will want to moderate how we increase salaries of public sector workers. Of course, government cannot do without increasing, but discussion with labor and to ensure that cost of living is in tandem with the economic situation is what government is going to use. Two, government doesn't intend to create new institutions where it would demand that we would hire more people to fill in this institution. So the savings that is going to be made from these two strong measures, limiting the increment of salaries or wages, and also limiting the recruitment. If I was planning to recruit 1,000 people, government can have it to 500 people. Okay, and that saving is going to be about 0.5% of GDP. So together, that is what has been presented in that state.
So it doesn't mean that there will be freezing in employment.
There will not be freeze on employment.
Okay.
In fact, if you read the document on social sector, education and health have been considered so crucial, and that there's going to be even enhanced expenditure in this area. It means that we'll hire nurses, it means that we'll go on to recruit teachers because of the necessity and then the importance of these particular sectors, as it were. But what it essentially means that government would not want to create new institutions. You remember the 2023 budget, the finance minister mentioned of a net freeze in employment, which made the headlines, and people misunderstood it to mean that there will be total ban on recruiting new people. But thankfully, the IMF policy document is out, and the policy document clearly says that, look, you would have to limit wage increase.
Okay.
So this is what we just have to do in that regard.
Thank you. Doc, just about wrapping up, what will be your last word? What do you think that we should do going forward?
No, I think that, like I said earlier on, this is done already, it's finished. What we need for industry in the private sector, I think that there are three major key ministries, that industry, tourism, trade, and also agriculture, which is everybody's talking about. So there might be that kind of an engagement very, very quickly with these three sectors, which will be able to lead the growth, agri, trade and industry, and also tourism. So that whatever we can do to move to plan B as to future revenue. Because as Doc is saying, it's a debt. How do we pay the debt? So if all the probabilities in the document does not work, we need to fall on the back on the private sector. So that's what we're going to do. So I think we need to have to encourage them going forward and see what we can do.
All right, grateful to you, Dr. Klucheson. Let me go to Dr. Saad. Dr. Saad, so just about wrapping up, in the next minute, what will be your concluding remark on this discussion?
Let me just go back to what Dr. Richmond was saying. I think Dr. Richmond was a bit charitable to the government, or probably not to scare Ghanaians. But if we don't get the 1.5 stability fund, $1.5 billion stability fund by July, we cannot avoid a banking crisis. It's inevitable. So at least the government must be told straightforward to be aware. And you see, people seem to confuse the whole thing. In actuality, we need $4.5 billion for the Ghanaian economy, not just $3 billion. Because the $3 billion is from the IMF, which will help with the macro stability and all that. But we need another $1.5 billion for the Ghana Financial Stability Fund. So those are two separate entities we are dealing with. But it seems the IMF issue has taken the whole entire conversation, that people are not focusing on the 1.5 billion Financial Stability Fund for the banks. And if you go back to the Bloomberg reports and all that, it's clearly stated how much losses these banks have made. Since 1993, some of them have been made losses. They have all recorded losses.
Okay.
So if government doesn't act fast enough to help them stabilize through the fund, then definitely what will be the next target? We will have a banking crisis. It's obvious. And we shouldn't play worse with this. We should just let the government know straightforward. And again, like I keep saying, we really need to let the government, put the government on its toes enough, because we have seen from 2007 all the way till now what the government said it would do, and at the end, it doesn't get it done.
Okay, all right.
You understand? Because if the government had received over $40 billion in resources to date, it hasn't been able to salvage the economy. What magic should we expect that the $3 billion should do? And I think we should all focus on the government, scrutinize it well to make sure that it actually delivers what it says it will.
I'm very grateful to you, Doc, for joining. Dr. Saad Idrisu is an economist. In studio, Dr. Prince Kofi Klucheson. He is a former president of AGI and the current chair is the board for the Chamber of Tourism Industry Ghana Advisory Board, which I'm sure you still are. And then Dr. Kabiru Mahama is from the Vice President's office. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us here on the AM show.
Thank you very much.
All right, so I'm sure this discussion about the IMF will still continue wherever we are. Let's continue talking about it and see how we can move Mother Ghana forward. There's more on the show. Stay with us. We'll be back with more.